Hi, and welcome back to Football Made Simple. The knockout stages kicked off as Italy prepared to take on Austria in the round of 16. Italy has been one of the most impressive teams at the Euros so far, whilst Austria have given a good account of themselves, so it promised to be interesting. In the end, the game finished 2-1 to Italy, thanks to goals by Chiesa and Pessina, whilst Kalasic scored for Austria. The XG after 90 minutes was low, however, all that changed in extra time. But what tactics did both managers use? Let's take a look. A quick reminder of the formations used by both teams, as you can see courtesy of our video sponsor, OneFootball. OneFootball is the best football app on the market, giving you formations like this, stats, match commentary, and so much more to keep you up to date during the match. And for the Euros, they've even introduced a special Euros section, where you can easily access the latest news and scores from the tournament. The best part is you can get it absolutely free through the link in the description below. Now, let's start with Italy in controlled possession. For the most part, Italy built up with a back three throughout the match, with Di Lorenzo playing more like a right centre-back, and this horizontal coverage in deep regions would allow Spinazzola to push higher up the pitch. And the contrast in the fullback's behaviour was partly informed by the contrast in the winger's behaviour as well, as for the most part, Insigne moved infield to operate in the left half space essentially as another midfielder, whilst Berardi held his width much more. The midfield also gave this balance, as the left midfielder, Verratti, preferred to operate much deeper alongside Jorginho, almost as a double pivot, which would then give Insigne space higher up, whilst on the right, Barella preferred to push into this space, so he and Insigne operated almost as 10s. And on paper, Austria initially had a back four and a higher line, so Italy would have both half spaces occupied. But Austria in the first half adapted brilliantly to this by shifting to a back five, and their defensive shape was fluid throughout the match, as Grilic could drop into the backline, or Lima could operate much deeper. Either way, the main aim was to guard the half spaces, which was effective. But of course, there are drawbacks to almost every formation. Italy now had a 3 vs 1 advantage in the deep build-up, meaning they could easily switch attacking sides. In addition, the flatter midfield also meant that Italy's wider centre-backs got a lot of time on the ball, and they often looked for balls into the forwards, making runs into the space. It also meant that Arnautovic was often isolated up front, making their previously effective transitions more difficult. But we also saw Austria defend with a back four, in a 4-1-4-1, a 4-4-2, a 4-2-3-1, but for a lot of the second half, they defended in a 4-3-2-1. In this shape, one of the two could always press the ball side centre-back to prevent progression. They could also sit deeper and try to pressure both of Italy's pivots, who were generally controlling the game, whilst also hypothetically having more cover in the half spaces deeper. But down the left, Italy could still often find Spinazzola if the fullback was tucked in, and he was a threat throughout, taking on his man time and again to get crosses in. In addition, on more than one occasion, despite the hypothetical advantage of Austria's shape, Italy was still able to find penetrating passes through the lines to find men in the half spaces who could then turn and look to create. We see some of this in Italy's goal. Austria are defending in a deeper, disciplined shape, and Locatelli has moved to the left centre-back position as Acerbi looks to move higher. But Locatelli is able to find Insigne in the half space, as Lina had one eye on Spinazzola wide due to Italy's 5 vs 4 advantage in the final line. So Dragovic and Hinteregger are dragged across. Pessina's run from the half space leaves Chiesa free, and he receives the switch and using the space is able to finish. But particularly early on in the game, Austria were incredibly effective in the transition, particularly when Zabitzer was able to be goal side of Italy's pivots. This would mean that if Italy's pivots pressed, which they did effectively at times, there was potential for the ball between the lines, and plenty of numbers would be arriving to make the most of these transition opportunities in the wider regions, particularly through Alaba. But let's look at Austria in possession. Austria were insistent on building short from the goal kick, splitting their centre-backs with Grilic in the pivot position, at times joined by another midfielder. And Italy's wingers would press, with Immobile more withdrawn onto one of the pivots. And they could have gone directly to the fullbacks, but Italy's own fullbacks would have more easily anticipated this and pressed them before they had the chance to get the ball under control. Instead, they played the ball more deep to draw men higher into the press, so that when the pass into the fullback did come, more of Italy's players would be bypassed. But that was only when it worked, as on several occasions, Austria played themselves into trouble, leading to some dangerous situations. But higher up the pitch, if only Immobile was pressing, Austria stuck with two centre-backs, but Barella was often willing to push up to create a 2. This would be the trigger for Grilic to become the third centre-back, and in this match, Alaba often maintained his width down the left-hand side, rather than inverting into the midfield. And generally, Austria looked to play quite vertically, in the shape of risky line-breaking passes. And to maximize these situations, they would often try to overload the space between the lines, especially when Grilic was playing as a pivot, which would allow Zabitzer and Lima to push higher up and pick the ball up in dangerous situations. But with Austria's high line, Italy were also dangerous on the break. When the ball broke to the centre-backs, they often looked to find Immobile as quick as possible. In addition, with Grilic being the sole pivot, he could be overwhelmed by Italy's runners on the transition. Overall, Austria gave a good account of themselves, giving Italy problems throughout the match. But the depth Italy has from the bench made all the difference after 120 minutes. But what did you make of this match? Did it change your opinion on how far Italy could go? Drop it down below. And if you want even more content whilst helping to support the channel, consider checking out my Patreon at patreon.com/footballmadesimple. You'll get early access to videos, exclusive videos, as well as access to the upcoming FMS video podcast. But that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple.